Hey guys, so I want to talk today about HOAs. What are HOAs? If you're buying a loft or a condo, most likely it's going to have an HOA. Now, even some houses have HOAs, but today we're talking about condos. So, an HOA stands for Homeowners Association. Basically, it's a company that handles all the finances of the building and all the day-to-day operations of a building. And then you have the HODs, which are homeowner dues, which is how much you pay per month. Most of the HOAs are per month. If you're in a house, sometimes they have these places where the HOA is per year. But in a condo building, it's going to be per month. And so you want to know how much you're going to pay, and you want to know what it covers. Most of the time, it covers some of the utilities, insurance for the buildings, and maintenance of all this stuff like a gym and a pool and a doorman. Sometimes it covers more utilities, sometimes it covers less. Sometimes you are paying for the parking inside the HOA. So you want to find out what does it include. Second thing you want to know is there litigation in this building? Litigation is going to affect the loan. So if you're getting a loan and the building has litigation, it might be a problem. Now, if you're paying cash, it doesn't matter. But if you have a loan, the banks don't like to lend when there is litigation because the bank thinks, oh, if you lose the litigation, there might be a cash burden and might be a problem for the building. They have to come up with a lot of money. Now, there is small litigations and there is large litigations. Sometimes it's just like a homeowner suing the building for like a window that it broke and he thinks the building needs to fix it and not him. And sometimes it's construction defects, which is the most common. When developers build a building, it's a huge project. There's so many things involved. It's impossible to make it perfect. There's always little problems here and there. Sometimes they are very expensive problems, and sometimes they're just little things here and there. So a lot of times the HOAs will sue the developer and tell them, hey, you better fix the stuff or pay me an X amount and I'll fix it. And these are really affect the loans because these are big litigations and sometimes it can take years and you will affect your loans. Usually the attorney that is responsible for the litigation, he'll give a disclosure, what is going to outline, we're in litigation, this is what we're asking, this is who is handling the litigation. So you want to make sure that you can get loans in a building before you make an offer, because if it has litigation, it could be a problem. Second thing to look for is the reserves. What are the reserves? So when you pay HOAs every month, a portion of the HOA goes to pay all the bills, like the electricity bill for the building, the gas, everything, all the daily expenses of the building, like the doorman salaries and so forth. And then another portion goes what is called the reserves. So the reserves is kind of like a savings. Each building has expectancy. Each item in a building has a life expectancy. So if you have an elevator, they think, oh, this elevator is going to last 40 years. So in 40 years, you're going to have the money to buy a new elevator. So that's what the reserve is. The reserve lists all the items in the building and how much it's going to cost to replace them in the future. So if you have a reserve that is not funded, it's not good because you won't have the money to pay for these items when they come up. So it's important to see that you have a funded reserve. There's something called the reserve study. The buildings pay for a company to go in and check everything and say, hey, this is how much you need to have in your reserves to make sure this building is going to be sustainable and in good shape in the future. So if you have a building where the reserves are low, they might have to have an assessment to catch up, or they have to raise the HOAs to catch up. So that's something to think about it. And that brings you to the next subject, which is assessments. You want to see if there's any assessments coming up, because assessment's going to raise your HOA. Sometimes an assessment can be paid in a lump sum, and sometimes they'll put inside the HOA, say, oh, you're going to pay an extra X amount for 5 years or 10 years. So you want to make sure that you are aware if there are any assessments. The other thing you need to look for is you want to take a look at the HOA rules and see what kind of rules there are in the building. Like, let's say you have 5 dogs. Maybe the building only takes 2 dogs. Sometimes they have restrictions on the weight of the dogs. Only 2 dogs, 35 pounds each. Or you have a pit bull and they would not take a pit bull. Now, some buildings would not take dogs whatsoever. But now there is a law where they have to take at least 1 dog. But they can still have restrictions on weight and breed. So that's something to think about. You know, if you move in that building, I'm sure you don't want to give your dogs away. So you have to look into that. And then some buildings will have rental restrictions. What that does is they'll have something saying that, okay, only 10 units can be rented at any given time. So if you buy a unit there and you want to rent, and there are already 10 units rented, you have to go in a waiting list. And the waiting list can take a long time. It can take many years so you are able to rent your unit. So if that's your goal, to rent your unit, you might not want to be in that building. And it's not that common, but there are some buildings that have those restrictions. Another restriction is, you cannot rent the unit only after a year after you buy is when you can rent the unit. Some buildings have these kind of restrictions, but these are actually not legal. You are allowed to rent your unit, but the other restriction regarding the number of units, it's legal. Why does the building do that? Well, they do that because they want to preserve the value of the building. If a building has too many rentals, it's not good for the building because it's dirty. The renters don't care as much for the building as the owners. So the bank looks, usually they have a threshold of 70% owner occupied. It can vary, but to preserve the values of the building creates these restrictions. And if you're buying to lease your unit, that can affect you. The other thing is some buildings are live-work. And if you want to do an office in your building, you have to look into the HOAs and see what kind of office you can have there. Sometimes if you have too many people in the office, they're not going to want that there. So you have to make sure you read about these things. Another thing to think about, so the HOA meets every year, a few times a year, depends on the size of the building and the HOA. They meet often or less often. And they have something called the minutes. The minutes are basically everything they talk about in each meeting. So you want to read the minutes to be aware of what's going on in the building. Sometimes they'll say something like, we're talking about replacing the elevator next month, or the roof is falling apart, we need to do something, or the neighbor on X unit is being super loud every day. And so, if you buy a unit next to a loud neighbor, you probably might not want to buy next to that neighbor. So these are the things to think about. These are the main things. You want to be aware of these things before you get into a building. The other thing, HOA amounts. Amounts vary. I've seen HOAs anywhere from like $200 to $5,000, depending on the building, depending on the number of amenities, the size of the building. HOAs do go up almost every year, so be aware of that. The HOAs, they don't want to increase the HOAs every year. It's not like, we're trying to get more money from these people. But the salaries go up, electricity goes up, so they have to, match it in order to be able to pay for all the expenses in the building. A lot of the people that move from apartment buildings, they look at HOA amounts and they think, that's super high. $1,000, $800. Now the people that move from houses, they actually know it's not that high. You got to think about the HOA is doing everything for you. Like, you don't have to get a pool guy, you don't have to get a gardener, you don't have to get a doorman. The HOA is not only paying for that stuff, but it's managing. Like, if you live in a house and you have to manage your gardener and your pool guy, if he doesn't show up one day, you got to track him down, find another pool guy. Also in a house, especially if you have a pool, your water bill is really high, your electricity is really high, there's no included utilities like in an HOA. So sometimes it seems high, but it's not that high. So these are the main things to look for. If you have any other questions or you want to look at some places, send me a DM. I hope that's helpful, and I'll see you next time.